Okay, good morning, everyone. I think it's best if we make a start. Thank you so much for coming. I don't know whether anyone has been reading any of the phrases that have been appearing on the board, but this provides a little bit of context for what I'm going to talk to you about today and the focus for this term. So I'm going to also now move on to one more bit of context, which I'd just like you to read quietly, and then after that, I'll begin. Okay, I'll just read that last sentence again. As he listens to Henry answer the question correctly, Mr. Harris thinks, I wonder how many other kids know this. He isn't confident that anyone else does. So you've had two bits of context there for what I'm going to talk to you about today, which is participation by right and inclusion by design. In all of those statements that were running at the beginning, there were pupils that had learning needs or some kind of need that will enable them to access the learning, and they weren't able to participate because those needs had not been met. In the example you just read, it was more a case of the way the classroom had been run and the fact that there were some children in the class who were really keen to answer, and there always will be, and that's great. But we need to make sure that every child gets to participate in their learning. And I'm going to give you a bit of context for this. So these are our learning goals, that all children in Clifton are safe, that all are thriving, and this happens all of the time. And so the question I ask myself is, well, what do they need to thrive? Well, they need to belong, they need to feel like they belong, and they need to actually be successful in their learning to the extent to which that is, their best potential. So in terms of this, they've got to be able to participate, and therefore we have to design our teaching to be inclusive. So it's a term that a lot of you might be familiar with, but if you're not, I'm really going to hope that you would really be clear on what inclusive teaching is, and the difference between that and person-specific adjustments, which we're also going to talk about. I would also like to thank Daisy, Angela and Joe. We had an amazing meeting before Easter. We are completely on the same page with this. They're going to give you an amazing session later today. And also to Emily Vickery for her amazing EAL bulletins, again, which tie in with all of this beautifully. So we're all on the same page here. So these are the goals of our focus area. So by the end of this term, I would like everybody to be able to, every lesson, pupils have an equal chance to participate. And to ensure that the majority of this is not a voluntary thing, not initiated by the pupils themselves. To ensure that everybody here has a range of participation strategies and they know how to use them, which one to use for which reason. Because if you use it for the wrong reason, it can actually hamper learning and cause anxiety, and there are a lot of issues follow with that. To make sure that when we do use a strategy, that we're actually doing the procedure in a way that will allow all children to access it, which means we need to instill these principles, inclusion by design. And this is taken from the EYFS report recently on SEND. Good teaching for SEND and EAL pupils is good teaching for all pupils. And then to make sure that we also know what would be the person-specific or the reasonable adjustments for a very small minority of our pupils. And speaking to Angela, Joe and Daisy, they're very sort of clear on this, that it is a very small number that will need person-specific adjustments. And if we design our teaching to be inclusive, then we will pick up the majority of pupils with learning needs and we will take them along with us anyway, and pupils without learning needs will not be disadvantaged. So, linking with the teacher standards, and I planned this before I saw Rob's presentation yesterday, so it's great that we're all thinking about this now. Teacher Standard 5 says this: adapt teaching to the strengths and needs of all pupils. And I've sort of rewritten it because you can't do that until you've done this. Design teaching to account for the strengths and needs of all pupils. And that's really what we're focusing on this term. And then next term, we will be looking at adapt teaching to respond to the strengths and needs of all pupils. So I've done some AI generation of images. We get my prompt honing down. So why do we need this? Well, if we want them all to thrive, as I said at the very beginning, there are two things that need to happen. They need to feel like they belong and they need to learn. What drives those two things? Well, belonging is fueled by relating, by actually having interactions with other people. And learning is driven by thought. The problem is relating and thought are both invisible. Okay? And so we've got to drive those. We've got to help them with those things. Both of those things are facilitated by participation. And so it is our duty to make sure that all of our pupils participate. The other advantage, which enables us to fulfill Teacher Standard 5, is if they all participate, we actually get information from every single pupil in our class about their understanding and their progress, and that will enable us to adapt our teaching for all of them. So it's just a win-win situation. So the question is there a difference in ability between pupils that have these factors that are in the grey boxes? Is there a difference in success/progress with pupils that have these characteristics in the grey boxes? Well, let's have a look. No. Any pupil, regardless of their learning needs or their socioeconomic background, can have any ability. Okay? And actually, obviously, we don't want to think that there is not a growth mindset, because actually, if you work hard and smart, everybody can move up. But what actually happens in reality? Well, all of the data shows us this is what happens in reality. So we know that any pupil should be able to succeed, but in reality they don't. It's all of the pupils in the red boxes that don't end up having the best outcomes. Thank you, Gil. Sorry. So if you substitute shyness in that sentence for all of the other words in the red box, all of them fit. Even though insert da 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 is unrelated to intelligence, those students underperform. And students with, again, insert any of those things in the red box, tend to be disproportionately impacted by the quality of our teaching, by our design principles of our teaching. So we've got to address this. We really do. We have to level the playing field because this shouldn't happen. I was speaking to one of the people I'm doing my Leading Teacher Development course with, and she said she'd read a recent post on LinkedIn, which talks about the sliding doors effect. And so if you have a look at this picture, here are three pupils with different needs. Okay, this is sort of showing a bit of physical need, but actually if you think about this as a learning need as well, any need, which children actually helped to enter the learning building by those doors? Are they all helped? Yeah, of course they are. Are any of them hindered? No. And that's the point of inclusion by design. If we design our teaching to be inclusive and accessible, it doesn't actually have any negative impact on the pupils that don't have needs, but it has a massive impact on the pupils that do have needs. And so that's why we've got to do it. Again, taken from the EEF report, it needs to be upstream. It needs to be proactive. It doesn't need to be reactive. So if we design our teaching upstream, we're not going to need to do these add-ons apart from those person-specific adjustments for pupils that have very niche and specific needs. So it's got to be a fundamental design principle. It just has. Tom Rees is amazing. He's government advisor on SEND. He speaks a whole lot of sense. I've got a lot of resources again for you to interact with. Please do have a look at them because it's really quite moving. Not going to read that. You can read that later. So how do we make our teaching inclusive? So first of all, we've got to remove barriers. And second of all, we've got to include scaffolding. Now, scaffolding is not hand-holding. If you include scaffolding, you are not holding their hand. You are enabling them to access your teaching. And again, all of these are taken from the report. So it's just everyday good teaching that we just need to establish. And once that's been there, it'll be much, much easier for teachers as well. I know Daisy and Angela and Joe are going to talk to you about some general design principles. So I'm not going to touch on all of these, but I've tried to adhere to them in what I'm doing as well. But over here, these are all just basic design principles for pupils with needs. And today, what I'm going to talk about for TNL is going to hit nearly all of these on the right-hand side. And obviously then, remember, there is also those person-specific adjustments, which are maybe then an add-on. So again, what is participation? How do I define participation? Well, it's pupils doing one of those three things in your classroom, because that makes thinking visible, that makes relating visible, that drives those things. Those three ways of participating are massively influenced by these two things here. By the way you design your teaching, which is the instructional factors, and by how they feel connected to everybody else in the classroom. And that will massively influence whether they do or don't participate. The benefits of participation are huge. So I'm just going to quickly run through them. You get to interact with your pupils. They get to interact with each other. The group gets more identity. You can praise them. You can actually correct any errors and misconceptions. They can elaborate on their ideas. They can practice stuff. You know, they might say, yeah, I get it. But unless you make them actually work with it and talk with it and write with it, then that's not practice. They're not embedding it as they need to be. It prevents you forming any biased opinions of any pupils in your class because of their lack or extent of participation. And it reveals thought and understanding to both pupils and teachers. As thought is invisible, we can often assume we understand something, and actually if you don't externalize it, you don't know that. So not going to read that either. So collective efficacy is what I've been sort of going on and on and on about. It makes everything easier. And actually, I just want to say well done, because last term, all the lessons that I watched made me feel really uplifted in how much everybody is pulling together. Like the starts of your lessons, I could just see this whole college movement happening in the expectations and the routines. And I don't know about you, but I found my teaching was easier because of it. So this is all helping us and helping the pupils. And so Michaelmas 24, we looked at some sort of things for behaviour, because if you're going to develop teaching, you start with behaviour. You can't start anywhere else. Then you go to participation, then you go above that. So that's what we're doing. So we looked at signal, pause, insist. We looked at always front loading, and I'll come back to that today as well. And you did amazingly with getting lessons started. And now, this was last summer, we looked at equity of participation, coming back to that now with these really key strategies that enable you to make sure that the participation in your classroom is not overly voluntary and that everybody participates equally. So we're going to expand our repertoire. So we've got three. You may or may not have succeeded in those three. You may feel, do you know what, I've got one of them. Yeah, got it. You might think, not too sure about the other two. So maybe you want to work on the other two, but there is some people in this room who I know are deploying all of these, bam, 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 as they should be, with fidelity, and it's really working, and you need some more to expand into. So I've got a top 10 of strategies, which is on your strip that you've got, and there's also lots of information in the booklet, but if you just want to have a little look at your strip for the moment, you'll see the three familiar ones, and then you'll see some extras. So this is our key messaging. We all need a repertoire of strategies that are deployed judiciously, so for the right reasons, and with fidelity. So a lot of people might, and I bet if I asked you which participation strategy are you most worried about, probably people would say cold call. I would be willing to bet that all of the issues you're seeing with cold call are possibly to do with some slight things to do with maybe not using it for the right reasons, or slightly around the right messaging, or whether you've actually got the procedure down. Because actually, if done for the right reasons, it's a very welcoming invitation to the conversation. So, how do individual participation in your class? So we've got cold call already. That's what we've got. I'm adding in pepper. And I'd be willing to bet that most of us might slip into pepper and call it cold call. Again, I'm not going to go through them all now. You're going to get a chance to talk about them in your groups afterwards. So, but I just want to make sure that it's clear that that is an individual strategy for participating in a classroom. Cold call and pepper. Pepper does get more pupils. at a time. It's quicker, more quick fire. Cold call is a little bit deeper in that thought. These ones, I'm not saying we don't use these, okay? They're in orange because they're voluntary. Voluntary participation is very low ratio. Very few pupils are going to do that. You're not going to hit very many of them. But I'm not saying they're in the booklet, they're on the strategy strip. There are reasons to use these, absolutely, and I've given those reasons. They are individual ways that pupils can participate in your classroom. I would advise you don't pick one of these to work on this term because they're voluntary, but I just want you to be aware that they are there. Then we've got our pair strategy. So last summer we looked at think, pair, share, and we're adding tell your partner. Again, there are differences between them and they're used for different purposes. I've actually been using tell your partner quite a lot last term and I love it. And then we've got our all together. How do they participate all at the same time? We've got simultaneous response and you've got various ways to take your responses. We're also adding in everybody writes and call and response. And this is possibly at the moment my favorite because this was my biggest focus last term. And my classes are really, really enjoying it now. And we're really kind of upping our participation. So we need to just prioritize this. This is inclusive teaching. Familiar, powerful. So I'm just going to briefly run through the key factors I want you to focus on in your groups. Should be another maybe 5 minutes and then we'll move on to the groups. So I really want you in your groups, just when you think about these strategies, I really want you to be clear on the purpose for which you are using each one. Because if you use it for the wrong purpose, it can backfire dramatically. Ratio is a key concept with participation. So along the bottom is how many pupils in your class are participating. If you're unsure of ratio as well, it's one of the key terms on the front of the booklet. So what we want, if you pick a strategy at any point in your lesson, you want to pick the highest ratio strategy for the time you have available. That's simple. And so you want as many pupils in your class participating as you possibly can, which is along the bottom. And you want them thinking as deeply as possible. So when they are participating, how much thought are they putting in? I would say, and actually the literature agrees with this, that actually the number of pupils participating is possibly more important. Okay? So we actually have some strategies that are very high number of pupils, but actually maybe low depth. A bit like call and response, okay? But remember, we're not just thinking about learning, we're thinking about belonging as well. So a lot of these high pupil number strategies are brilliant for building group identity and feeling like you belong with someone and interacting with someone. What we don't really want are the ones at the really low end of the number of pupils, because you're just going to help 1 or 2 pupils at a time. But obviously do consider going up and down, do consider the depth of thought. There are some strategies that are right over there in the top corner. Think about the format. When you are doing the strategy, are you doing it? Are you building in enough scaffolding? Are you actually front loading? All of these things really, really matter. Have you missed something out? Is it not quite going right? If it is, just go back and have a look. How much time do you have? Some of these take longer than others. Okay, so you can't do the long ones all the time because they do take a long time. Always, always front load the means. Always. Tell them what they have to do before you give them the thing they have to think about. Always. Don't show them the thing they have to think about until they know what they are doing. There must be sufficient scaffolding. If you do something in your lesson and when you take feedback from the pupils, it's not what you expected, they didn't quite get, oh, that's not what I wanted them to think about, then you didn't put sufficient scaffolding in that activity. And finally, any participation routine that has a thinking phase is the opportunity for pupils not to think, does carry a risk that they may not think. So do think, if you're using a strategy that has a thinking phase, how can you build in accountability for doing that thought during that phase? And again, I should have added in another one here. With the scaffolding, remember, this is inclusive teaching. This should be there every single time. It should never not be there. And then you need to check all the SEND profiles and the EAL profiles of your pupils. And if you have any that need person-specific adjustments that are beyond this inclusive teaching, and like I said, if your teaching is inclusive, there are very few of them that will need those extras. Do make sure you're aware of it. So I'm only going to go through strategy number 1. Then I'm going to close, and then you can go into your groups. Just to make you aware, all of this is on pages 13 to 22. There is one page per strategy. I'm only going through one, so you get the format. So if you look at page 13 as I go through it, cold call, we're all familiar with cold call. So I just want to go through. Each strategy will begin with why do we use it? What is the purpose of the strategy? So for cold call, it's very much embedding and encoding information. With then, there's a box for the procedure. How would you do a cold call in the classroom? Then, how long is it going to take you? It's a longer strategy. And then you've got your ratio graph. How high is your ratio? Okay, cold call is a lower participation ratio, but a very high thought ratio. Depends how many pupils you go to afterwards. You can up the participation by going to more pupils afterwards. You can also up the participation by telling them to turn to their partner afterwards. There's loads of ways you can do it. Is it voluntary? No, it isn't. That's good. It's not a voluntary strategy. They're not relying on them to try. You're making sure they do. Notice it's not random though. Cold call is not random. And then finally, what sort of content skills should you use it with? And then we've got the scaffolding and reasonable adjustments. So I would say 1 and 2 are scaffolding. They should be there all the time. 3 is potentially a person-specific adjustment. I think 4 is potentially a person-specific adjustment for an EAL pupil. I would say 5 potentially could be a scaffolding that's there all the time, depending on the ability range of your class. And 6 is probably a person-specific adjustment. And then there's cautions. How could it go wrong? How could it not work at all? How could it completely backfire? How could it even maybe hamper learning? So do pay attention to the red boxes. Okay, I'm not going to go through all the others, just apart from non-verbals, because I really want to show you what the pre-prep are doing. Non-verbals are a way for pupils to participate at any time in your lesson without any noise happening. The pre-prep use respectfully challenge. If someone is saying something and they want to challenge it, they use I agree, they use brain match, thinking thumb, and build on. So the pupils can do those at any point during a lesson. The teacher goes, oh, I noticed you want to build on that. What do you want to say? Or the teacher can use these during a simultaneous response as how they want the pupils to respond. Teachers can also make the whole class stop by getting their attention, which is a bit like our signal, pause, insist. Now, this is just a suggestion, upper school teachers. In prep teachers, you don't have to use them. If you want to try this with older pupils, I've suggested maybe respectfully challenge, I agree, British Sign Language, silent hand, I have a question, I've got something else to say, I don't understand. See what you think. Okay, finally, these are not isolated things. They are a repertoire. There are 10 of them. Really expert teachers, and I've seen teachers do this, and it is amazing. It's like watching a virtuoso conducting a symphony in an orchestra. It's amazing. They're just like pow, 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 pow. Their pupils are participating all the time. They are still the expert in the room. They are still running the room. This is where we want to get to. Don't make the mistake of thinking this sounds simple and beneath us. It's not. We need to have the intellectual humility to know that the small stuff matters. It really does. And I just want to say, finish with this. Remember what we said at the beginning, how you don't know what your pupils thinking about? This is just something from one of my classes recently. I asked them to write down 9 words they thought I was going to say during my explanation. And one of them wrote, talk to your partner. And I was like, yes, I've got an embedded participation routine because he knows I'm going to say that. So I think, yeah, loads of stuff for you to look at as well. But I think that's basically it. So before you go, 4 groups had rooms. Do double check with your group. Maybe if the group leaders stand up first, that'll be good. My group is staying in here. Please find your group leader. It's on my email from this morning. Thank you very much. Off you go. Okay.